Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Squall Growth Podcast. I am so excited for our guest today, Jeremy Fish. Welcome to the show.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Jeremy, it's good to see you. We know each other from way back, but I would love if you could tell us a little bit about your story, your background, and and we can get into what you're up to today.
For sure. Let's see. After college, had a degree in chemistry and realized that I hated chemistry, and so was building an app for nightlife in Vegas. And when that didn't work out, I think you, of course, found my resume when you were hiring for Tracker and went to work for you. Started as kind of marketing manager and then went up to director of acquisition, I think it was. And then kind of moved from there to a couple different agencies. And then after that, realized that I could start my own and have been doing that for 5 or 6 years, but have been primarily working with Storyworth as their head of growth. And then also, since I started my agency, I've been working on kind of a virtual music festival video game in the background. So split between the marketing side and the product and engineering side.
That's amazing. I mean, it's interesting because you always had that entrepreneurial bug to you. And so what is it that you have really enjoyed about starting something new and going off on your own?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's ironic because I started my agency like, oh, I could be my own boss, and then you get clients and they're your boss. And so it's kind of a funny and ironic thing. But no matter what, you get a startup and your investors are your boss. There's always someone there. But I think the idea of I consistently went to multiple companies and was able to increase their revenue pretty dramatically in different ways. Kind of gave me the confidence to know that like, oh, this isn't like a fluke. It's not just necessarily the brand I'm working with. Some brands you work with and they just work because the product is so good. And I kind of was able to see that that wasn't necessarily the case. I actually made a difference. And so, um, realized that I could make a difference with a bunch of different companies, started my own agency, and at the same time, I had started to see my other project, which is called Frisson, and I knew it would take a very long time and a lot of development work. So learned to code in the background up until I was ready to start my agency, and I just started building both at once and figured if my agency did well, I can fund the game. And so that's kind of where I'm at now, running what I'm good with and what I'm passionate about. One fuels the other.
Well, something that I've always deeply respected with what you do and who you are is that you've mentioned two things there is that confidence and that consistent learning, right? And it really takes both to kind of, start something on your own, but also to kind of get into that habit of trying new things and winning and taking risks. But I really think about those two things. What of those like two things, and how is that like serving you today as you're going on, Frisson, and you have your agency and you have Storyworth as well?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think confidence for me is always just in the numbers. Like it's funny because I think a lot of people, it's like someone tells them good job and you're like, oh, I did a good job. And I've never had that. Like if I see the numbers, uh, tell me I did a good job, like that's what does it for me. So I think that instills the confidence. At the same time, I have, uh, I don't want to say unfortunate, but I have definitely taken risks that have not paid off. My first example is always when we were at Tracker and we tried doing accelerated delivery of ads in Facebook, and I think I spent $7,500 in like 5 minutes, and we were like, "Whoa!" And there no sales came out of it. And so like that was like a very much, and I think it's important in general to like have those things keep you in check, right? You're kind of like it's not you can take every risk and it pays off, but I think doing the research, taking calculated risks, and seeing them pay off over time, I think instills confidence in me. But those mistakes kind of also dial me back as I think they should. And then,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
I mean, what's funny though is that like I didn't have the aptitude to actually probably think about that 7500, and we didn't think about, okay, that tracking, that systems, we're gonna have to wait a little bit for it to know
right,
if it worked or something, right? So
right.
it's funny because sometimes it's like, oh wait, that failure or that mistake, it actually led to something else,
Hmm.
and a
Hmm.
different win down the way.
Right.
That you can see at first.
For sure. And I think there's also something to be said of, you can put your confidence in a system and it can fail you, or sometimes it does really well. Like if a product's really well made, SaaS, hardware, whatever, you put your confidence in it and it does what you expect or more. But at the same time, you know, I've you can put your confidence in something that you create, and when that works out too, that's like even better. So yeah, it's
Mm.
interesting because it's like I put the confidence into another platform. It's like, was it the platform's fault? Was it my fault? Probably a little bit of both. But to your point, you learn either way. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, and it's that consistent learning that is so valuable. And going from chemistry to going and marketing, getting entrepreneurial with sales, and putting yourself out there, which is very freaky for folks. To now, you've also have connected it with programming, and that's
Mhm.
always something that is so interesting. In how I'm consistently shocked by how few digital marketers and digital product people and digital salespeople know how to code when they are interacting with software all day and having to piece along stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
I personally would get sick and tired having to ask, Jimmy or Sally, hey, how can you do that JavaScript for me
Right.
consistently? It drive me insane.
Right.
But how did that spark happen, and because did it happen with Frisson while you were trying to launch it? Is that you kind of dove in?
Yeah, I think that was the spark. But it even after college, when I realized I was like chemistry, I don't want a job in that, and I wanted to code. And actually, Ashwin, my friend, he was like, "You have the mind for it. You'd be great." And I was like, "I don't know." And I tried like multiple online courses, and just none of them hit. I tried C++, I tried web development, and I just couldn't get passionate about it. I think it was a combination of things. One, uh, it was like I had always had in my head this idea of wanting to build some sort of game around a music festival. There aren't at the time there weren't there's still not many games. There's only a couple, and I don't know they were super well received, but there aren't really any video games around music festivals. So I daydream all the time, and I have ADHD, so my brain wanders on these ideas, and I kept coming back to this one of being able to build your own music festival. And that was happening while I was at an agency um, that I was feeling undervalued at, and was frankly quite unhappy at. And it was a combination of me feeling like I was doing like a lot more than I was uh, and not feeling that the value was returned. And I think that having that and honestly, going to that job and daydreaming, I had to drive like 2 hours each way, 3 days a week. I just sit there and I daydream, and about this game. And so I was like, I'm going to build this. I'm going to start building it. And I think like the combination of like being like, you know, relatively unhappy with my job, and then seeing this kind of like new thing that I could do. And I started really small. I was like, I'm just going to do like video game programming, which I had tried before, but the programming part didn't work. So I looked up like what's an easier video game. And I think it was, crap, I can't remember the platform, but there's a really simple game development platform with a simplified version of JavaScript. And that simpler logic started clicking. I went back to the same class I
Mm.
did for Unity, and all of a sudden it was like everything just fell into place. And I started building what I wanted to build rather than a website, rather than whatever the C++ was having me do. And instead
Yeah.
of it being abstract, it was real. And I think for me, that's always been, again, like the motivator is like, if the numbers show it, if it's real, if it's like I'm not just building some random thing that isn't going to do anything, I get really behind that. I'm passionate about it if I can see the impact it'll have in the future, even if it's 10 years down the line. So, yeah, long-winded way of saying,
It
I think the spark was there, and then the opposite of me not being too happy like made it a fire.
Yeah, you had the spark initially, right? With college, good advice from a friend, and then you just needed the Kindle, right, to
Mm-hmm.
kind of set it off, right? And I totally relate with that. Is like in college, I wasn't much of a programmer and a builder, and but then when I saw something and I could connect it, I got super into and passionate about firmware programming, and then doing BlackBerry programming. They dating me significantly, and then now today, doing a lot of I'm mainly doing a lot of Node and JavaScript stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and Flutter today. But it's something where I think programming is tough to learn if you're just doing it in a classroom setting,
Right.
because it feels like you're building nothing and you
Right.
don't get any.
Exactly.
And I think that erases the joy of programming, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. I think I don't know, like and I do wonder a lot about how, I don't remember if it's, I've read a bunch. I don't know who said it, if it's official or there's research to back it, but I've read a lot that supposedly like only a finite amount of people, like a percentage of the population, are like able to comprehend, like their brains work in the way that allows for programming. And you know I don't like hearing those things personally, so I'm always like, that can't be true. But at the same time, there's definitely some, like, I think there's probably just there's a limited number of ways, or maybe an unlimited number of ways for people to get that spark, to get them to learn something. And at the
Yeah,
end of the day, if you don't want to if you're not passionate about building something, you're already pretty much out, because that's kind of the whole point, right?
yeah. But I mean, for me, it's so I'm passionate about this. I have a belief, and count me wrong, and most people think I'm wrong, but I believe that anyone today in digital marketing should know JavaScript and in a
Yeah,
little bit of HTML, little CSS, right? I mean, just and you don't need to write beautiful code. You should be able to, using ChatGPT, especially now, hack up a solution, right? You know enough to hack something up. I firmly believe that needs to be a job requirement for digital marketers going forward.
for sure. I mean, at a minimum, I think like knowing how to do web design with like some of these sophisticated builders like Shogun or Webflow, like that, at least. I mean, um, it's funny
But
because,
even with those
yep,
builders, you need to be able to, sometimes just drop in a little JavaScript to
yep,
get to work, right?
for sure,
Instead of
for
throwing up
sure.
your hands in the air.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think it should be like a prerequisite. But I think it's ironic because I I I can't even sit here and count on one hand how many people, or yeah, I can't even think of anyone really that besides like you, maybe some of the old people used to work with, like David, like people who are like could code at least some custom JavaScript and are marketers. It's just, I don't know why it's so rare.
Well, a lot
I
of
don't know.
them are on the the our affiliates, right? And building up
That's
custom
true.
gnarly
Yeah.
stuff, right?
Right. Yeah. There's the
That world.
double-edged sword of good marketers, and this is more into like straight up marketing, but it's become so hard, I think, to find good marketers because, as we can see with the two of us, right? Like, good marketers end up making their own agencies. They don't necessarily work for brands. It's pretty rare, especially people who can execute. Like if you can
Yeah,
execute, you're gonna execute on building your own agency because you can get as many clients as you want, scale it as much as you want, make as much money as you want. and work with who you want. And so it's kind of hard to, at the same time, find those people like affiliates, right? They're like, oh, I can make way more money just like doing this on my own, and then like
Well,
finding the best products and selling them.
Well, I think there's very rare people like yourself that it's like you can have the strategy and then you can do the execution, right? And execution in a lot of times it's taken like teams, and it usually takes doing it yourself on the execution side where you have a create you're trying to do that, and from out of frustration you're like, okay, I just want to build this. I'm sick of waiting for engineering to to serve me, because you're on the
Right,
back of the list. No engineer wants to work on marketing stuff. It's super
right,
frustrating.
right. Well, and I think you have the added communications layer, right? And so it's like, right, like marketing has a vision, design wants it to look a certain way, and then engineering has to build it. Whereas if it's like a product thing, there's usually a much
Mm,
more clear like demand, right? Like here's what
yeah.
customers say they like or don't like. We should build this, or like let's think of the thing we should build, as opposed to like when it's a marketing thing, it's got multiple teams involved. So I mean, probably my first experience with that kind of like dread of like, oh, I have to rely on someone to code it up was at Tracker. I remember
Yeah.
like asking our web dev, can you build this? Can you build that? And I remember them being like, I got all this stuff to do, and it's totally true. It's like, marketing wants to do all these things. I think when you don't have the understanding of, I think there's a phrase for it, but when you don't have that understanding of like, you think engineering things just like happen, or you'll be like, I want this button to do this, and it's like,
Yeah.
oh, no, no, no. I remember hearing that for the first time, like, oh, that's too much. We can't do that. That's going to take forever. And I don't get it. And now with Frisson, I'm like, oh shit, if I want this one thing to do this specific action, it can take a really long time to get that user experience. So
But now your coding education with it, right? I think that if marketers have that baseline coding, right, in baseline understanding, like it doesn't need to be much, but it's like, oh, what are the other ways that we can build this to get the ass, or like,
mm,
and I love it too, is like sometimes you just call BS on a programmer, because sometimes it's like they throw some technical jargon at you and it
right.
is BS because they just want to be lazy.
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
like, and it works for especially corporate world, like program engineers do that all day long.
Right. Right. Yeah, I mean, and that's another thing, right? Is it's like it's hard to find it's hard to find good marketers that are technical, have some technical skills, and then it's hard to find good engineers that also have like the full, not marketing but communication skills, and that's why you have
Absolutely.
product managers, and it's such an interesting dynamic, like to have these hybrid roles. But I think it's getting to be a higher and higher percentage of people, and as it gets more into our education systems, maybe in a couple decades, we'll have more people that are generally understanding coding. So yeah, it's an interesting
So
dynamic.
we're almost out of time here, and in talking a bit about your journey and having, multidisciplinary teams, like what's your advice for, marketers, people getting into their careers today?
Sorry, for marketers, general advice for
What's
what?
your advice for marketers, for teams, for folks who maybe want to, be like yourself and create their own agency?
In the aspect of like making their own agency. I think I underappreciated the business development and sales side of it all. And I
Mm,
think, it's easy, right? Like this podcast is a great way to get out in front of a bunch of people, that may need marketing help or be interested in learning more about it. But like, I think when I did it, it started because of warm leads and referrals. And when we were just chatting about it earlier, but like when you get into that position of like, oh shit, like I need clients, and it's all on you. I think having a way, knowing all beforehand a way to get more clients or working on that all the time, is kind of I think the main thing. And at the same time, I think starting any business, agency, startup, tech company, I think that the hardest thing to get over is that dread of it being all on yourself, and
Mm.
anyone, I mean, you've made a bunch of companies, right? And I think to your point, like both of us are pretty multi-skilled, so it's much easier for us. But I think when you're starting your own business, if you're only a marketer, if you're only an engineer, those other things seem like really intimidating, and it can be like a lot when you're starting because you're like, oh my god, I have to do all this stuff. How am I going to do it? And you can't pay for it either. Um,
Totally.
so I think learning as much as possible about everything you may will have to tackle and may have to tackle, I think is like the best way to start any business. And the less reliant you are on other people, the further you can go with less money. So yeah,
Absolutely. It's the conundrum, right? You definitely work with people and teams. We value teams, but you need to be able to rely on yourself as well, and that comes with what you started earlier on is confidence, right? Confidence is really interesting.
for sure, for sure.
Jeremy, thank you so much for taking the time to chat. Always love chatting with you, and yeah, thanks for coming on.
Likewise. Thanks, Chris.